Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show that you thought was dead. Making the rounds with Kelsey Moser and Emily Rand. Scuffed Production Edition. Actually, we thought it would be more convenient since we're in the same place to do it live. However, we didn't quite figure out
the lighting.
The lighting or the setup. We're getting there, though. Okay.
The next one will be improved. We promise, hopefully.
So far, Worlds 2019, we have seen the group stage of the play-ins. That's all we've seen. We still have
a long way to go.
More than a month, effectively. I think this shit ends at October 10th.
November 10th, yeah.
Yeah.
November 10th.
Wrong month. We're good. So, effectively, we're just going to reflect really quickly on what happened in play-in so far and then project forward to what we think the qualifier matches will do. Since there's going to be 3 days off, we'll probably do something else after that to kind of cement it and move on forward to the tournament. So, first of all, play-ins. If you've been on Twitter, which let's face it, we're all really sad people, and we have been on Twitter, you will notice a lot of people criticizing play-ins as a structure and as a concept even at the World Championship. Mm-hmm. So what do you think about generally like the play-ins format, anything like that?
So I wrote about this last night. I've been talking, not even like arguing, but just talking to people about it this morning. I think it is really difficult to defend play-ins on a competitive level. And I know a lot of people will probably be angry at me for saying that, and I know I've been like a staunch kind of personal defender of play-ins, and I actually still am for the tournament that Riot wants to run. Because, like, for example, a tournament where you can end up having SKT, Fnatic, and Royal in the same group already is not necessarily a tournament that is overly focusing on making sure that the best teams above all else are always the ones that are advancing. Now, I do think we had the best teams advance in play-ins. The play-ins thus far, yes. Despite like a few single game upsets, we had the teams that we expected making it out. So there weren't really any surprises that came out of play-ins outside of the fact that
Brazil beat Turkey in one game.
Yes.
So that was surprising.
Even though I am like the biggest fan of Brazil because I followed the region for so long, I actually didn't expect them to win a game. So that was they technically exceeded my expectations.
It's time for CBLOL fans to admit that their region is a tier 3 play-in region. You know, just kind of accept it, move on.
Yeah, it's
keep trying to level up, you know.
But I do think so. I think the most disingenuous narrative that I see around play-ins is the whole like they're just here to gain experience, which is, I think teams can gain experience from all sorts of things. Like my example from the conversation I was having on Twitter earlier was like TL has been a team that's been really upfront in interviews about talking about how like they go to international competition, they learn a lot, they come back to NA, and it's really difficult to keep that going because you can still win with a lot of bad habits. More specifically, like you can still win by locking in things that will scale well and you know, like drag the game out. Was the example that they used, and I would agree with that. So yeah, I mean, in terms of like the tournament that Riot wants to run, I will still defend play-ins. Obviously, it's really tough for a lot of these minor region teams because this is the only chance they get to go up against better competition. And while they do learn something, again, like in returning to their region, which is going to be a really long time from now, how much of that are you going to maintain? How much of it is even going to be relevant due to like patch changes and stuff like that? And then one thing that I don't think people talk about enough is the monetary and infrastructure discrepancy between a lot of these regions. Like 3 of the players on Mega had to pay their own way last year as part of Ascension just to compete. Like they did this just to be able to compete. And even though they have Mega now backing them, like an org like Mega is not going to have the same resources as even Flamengo, and I'm not going to say that Brazil itself has a ton of money, because it doesn't. So I think the other thing that no one really talks about is the ability for certain minor region teams to even take what they learned and apply it, because of either, like I said, they can win with bad habits in their region, or they just don't have like the infrastructure and coaching staff to be able to make it as valuable as it could be. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a discussion that people should keep having. I think it's still valuable for these teams to go to Worlds competition, because again, it might be the only chance they get to face better opponents. But I can see why people are frustrated. Like, this is the first time I've actually really seen like even coaches or followers of a lot of minor regions being like, this is really frustrating. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I feel like it's a conversation we should keep having, but that's kind of my take on it right now. And stop saying people are just here to have fun. Like, don't. That's a terrible narrative.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me, this is kind of a side tangent to the bigger point, but I keep seeing a lot of EU Masters teams say that why weren't EU Masters winners invited to this event? So the part of, first of all, where that sentiment comes from is teams like Unicorns of Love are basically part of the EU Masters scrim sphere, right? So when you sign up for a scrim group, you can scrim like a Turkish team, you can scrim another ERL team within your own region, you can scrim one in another region. There's a lot of diversity in teams that kind of feel roughly the same level. Obviously, we can quibble about which ERL regions are stronger, whatever. That's not what the point is, but that's why this sentiment is being echoed. So it feels a little awkward from that perspective. However, you need to understand that unicorns aren't here because they're representing like the ERL region. They're representing CIS, right? And 4 of the players on that team are CIS region players. Mm-hmm. Only one player is Inax, and like when I did talk to him, he's like, yeah, I basically feel like I'm still in Europe because we scrim the same teams, we do the same shit, and I was like, all right, well, there you go. But the thing is that that's not what they're representing, right? So when we talk about a Worlds tournament, and this argument's been used a lot, you have representation from this region of the world. Yes, they play on the EUS server because the EUS server is better, but they're still very much like they can't come to Berlin very easily without a visa. Mm-hmm. They can't really be an LEC. Like, we tried that experiment already.
It was if anyone like doesn't remember, it's actually like really sad.
It's one of the saddest things in League of Legends esports history, honestly, the decline of Moscow 5 as a result of these
insane
problems.
Visa issues. Yeah.
So I think that's a significant point to make, and it's, you guys have the advantage of the EU Masters region being able to level you to a point where you can compete in LEC, and when you come to this tournament, you'll have an insane advantage, right? When your players eventually come to this tournament, they have the insane advantage of being from the LEC. So I think that's a really significant thing. You can keep your teams here in the off season and scrim, like that's another viable option. Right? You can hang out and scrim some world teams. You might get some games thrown out. That happens a lot at LCK, right? Mm-hmm. In the Korean region, a lot of the Challengers Korean teams got scrims against like higher level teams. That said, if you guys invite Academy winners to EU Masters, then I'll be on your side. Just
you can be bribed.
Throwing that out there, yeah. But I think that's one of like the biggest points is that from first, also, if you guys are arguing from a competitive integrity standpoint, then that doesn't make any sense either. It's like, yeah, we should be invited to play-ins because we're just as good. But then you can take that same argument to say that the play-in shouldn't happen at all. So
and also just apply it to the general tournament.
Yeah, it's a very strange perspective, right? It's like, oh, okay, we can go to the eventual result of this line of reasoning and say that no NA team should be invited. No third seed, whatever region you think is shittiest, should be invited. Yeah. So, yeah, it happens.
I mean, the like unfortunate thing is that region locking isn't going to change. So that's like, if you want to get mad at something, that's the thing to get mad at, in my opinion. And also just the, like, again, to reiterate, I don't think you can look at the way that groups work, even for main stage, and tell yourself that this is definitively the idea of this tournament is that always we're going to find the absolute best teams that go through. I don't think we've had a Worlds winner that I've been like, wow, that team is like super undeserving, because we haven't. But in terms of, is this the best tournament to show off the absolute best games, having every single match be like, we're sending the best team through, I don't think that's this tournament.
Even the qualification system itself for Worlds is like, my favorite example is probably 2017 LCK, where you had KT knockout SKT, or it was 2016 actually, right? Cause
2016.
Rox came in first seed.
Yeah, KT faced Rox in finals.
And you had KT face Rox in finals, and KT knocked out SKT. If you look at those teams stylistically, the way KT played out is a really good way to play against SKT. The way Rox play against SKT is never, ever, ever gonna fucking beat them. Like, ever. Outside in a best of 5 setting. So I think that's like a really big point to bring up, is just that not even the qualification systems themselves are going to give you like a proper assessment of regional strength all the time, or whether or not this team is better against the other team. And then when they get sorted into groups, it's even more kind of weird. So I think that talking about the competitive integrity of the format as a whole is a really good argument to have, but the removal of plans, if you don't want to watch it, you don't have to, right? If you just care about watching the best games, just don't watch play-ins. It's not going to be the best games. It doesn't pretend to be the best games.
Yeah.
But that's kind of also the other. I do think it's worth it to have third seeds from major regions go through this, though. I think that's one point to make for sure, is that I do think it's worth it to have third seeds of major regions go through this, because it is stressful, and it will help them kind of level up in time for the major competition. It actually helps them get better to the point where they can handle it, because they iron out a lot of draft issues. A lot of their players on third seed teams just naturally usually have a lot of rookies, or international competition rookies, relative to the first and second seed major region teams. So I think it's usually a really valuable experience for them as well.
Yeah, talking to DAMWON, they already said that it's already been a really significant experience, because it kind of let them settle in, and I know they were talking about like food things, but but in terms of like draft and meta, like talking to them, they seem to have really enjoyed the fact that play-ins gave them a chance to calm their nerves on stage, and also just be able to adjust and figure out how they want to draft in the current meta. And I think that'll again shift. I think draft priority, we'll see it again shift once we start main stage as well.
So let's move on a bit and talk about the actual teams. A little bit more concrete information. Teams that were eliminated were
Mammoth, Mega,
Flamengo,
and
Detonation Focus.
Yeah,
that's right. The Japanese team. So those 4 are the eliminated teams. Do we think that they were significantly worse than the other teams? Because the projections is always like the third seed play-in teams are usually the worst.
No, I actually don't think so. I think of those teams, I'd probably say that Mega had in my opinion, Mega had the kind of toughest time, and the one game they won was that game where Pantheon went through, and they very smartly gave it to G4, because G4 is always going to go in if you've ever seen him play. It's a very good champion for him, and I think they, with that Pantheon, they kind of knew how they wanted to play it. But in terms of, like, for example, I'll use Flamengo because they have the most, in my opinion, like, glaring mistakes that they made in some of their losses. It's been harped on a lot, but it's worth bringing up that swapping against priority for Rift Herald is not a good idea. Please stop doing it. And if you want to see a really good example of why you should not do that, just watch Flamengo versus DAMWON Gaming, because I think they had a really smart early game against DAMWON. DAMWON is not a team that I would consider to be particularly strong early. I do think they have a lot of holes that teams can poke in them if you do have a strong early game setup. But then they completely throw away all of their advantages by swapping against tempo, which is not something new for Flamengo because we saw them do it already in this main stage, but also they've done it in Brazil as well. I think it's those kind of mistakes that made or broke some of these games where you have teams getting to a mid game and then they don't necessarily know what to do with tempo they've accrued. That's something that we didn't just see from Flamengo, but again, I think Flamengo is like the most obvious visual example of it if you go back and watch that DAMWON game. And I think that's when I look at the teams that were eliminated versus the teams that went through, I think the mid-game differences, and also, like, I know we're going to talk about draft later, but drafting also played a huge role. Yep. But again, I think, like, you saw it in the Mammoth game too, right, where they had the Syndra composition, and they get to mid-game and they don't know how to focus around, like, the picks that they can make with that champion. And they had a good idea of how they wanted to play it early. And it was just making those transitions into getting objectives in the mid-game. And this is something that we see major region teams struggle with, too, to be quite honest. But it's more apparent in play-ins when you have teams that can eventually just beat you on skill. For example, like DAMWON, who picked in some like scaling champions that they really like to play, and then they beat Flamengo in that game because they had those champions and because they do have better players. So yeah, I mean that's my take. That swap for Rift Herald still just, it's like a knife in my heart.
So wow, okay, someone's really invested in Flamengo here.
Someone's really invested in not swapping against tempo. Okay. Stop doing it.
All right.
I hate Rift Herald.
Too much clutch gaming for you. Too much LPL for you.
I hate Rift Herald.
So
don't talk to me about LPL and Rift Herald.
I would argue
bring that up later.
That a lot of the teams actually were significantly. There's teams actually were significantly worse than the others, and that's specifically because I think that the advantages they got were very kind of simple execution based. The variety of compositions that they could play and execute was much more narrow. So you saw with Mammoth, they had like very specific wombo combo style compositions, and then when they tried to expand into like more Lucian, Syndra based stuff, they could not like figure out how to play the game.
Couldn't execute it.
Whereas if with like their Kennen, Zyra Khan shit, they could always just find a window in the jungle where it's like, oh, this guy's walking in to get vision, and we have Rakan going in, and the follow-up from Kennen, and everything is just really simple after that. Xayah, they use some CC on Xayah shields, she kills them all. Like this very, very sort of straightforward. Well, you didn't actually have to know macro to win with those types of compositions. So I would argue that based on that, a lot of their ability to execute was a lot worse. And even I guess one of the best counterexamples would be the first Flamengo versus DAMWON game, where I would say both teams made very significant mistakes. DAMWON, specifically in the early game, DAMWON...
They invaded.
It's a split map scenario. Makes sense because it's like they have a strong side, right? But you don't want to split map versus Caitlyn because Caitlyn can get a lot of advantages out of that. So it felt really awkward, but the fact that they did that, but Flamengo made a more glaring error in not having like that kind of side of their jungle tracked, or not expecting, because even if they aren't going to go for a split map, Renekton and Talia, very early pressure, they're able to start enemy red and then recall and then defend their own buff, right? So those types of plays or those types of strategies, I think, can be a lot more, I would say the error was more significant on Flamengo's side, although there were errors on both. So I would say that those types of very basic understandings, like these small kind of mistakes that we're bringing up, are reasons why these teams lost. And most teams that aren't clutch gaming, right, would say that a a lot of these mistakes are more significant than some of the mistakes that the major region teams made, which were, okay, actually, I don't know. I'm thinking about Splyce now, and it's a travesty. The mid-game setup in the game they lost was so bad. They did not utilize the fact that they had strong sides at all. You know what? I'm talking myself out of my conclusion here, so we should probably move on to the next.
I'm gonna say, like, even though I slightly disagree, I do agree with the drafting point, and I know we're gonna talk about drafting next, but I do agree that the one major difference that we saw from the major third and second seeds, or depending on how you want to talk about Vietnam, and the minor region top seeds, is the fact that the amount of compositions that the major region teams can execute is significantly greater.
All right. So we are going to talk like more generally about drafts and the drafts that we're executing, because if you watch LS's Twitter, it's literally all he's talking about is his ability to predict games based off of draft. Most of these analysts are talking about are the impact of draft and why it's so significant. So from your perspective, Emily, because usually when we talk about draft, it's like the lower the level is, the less of an impact draft can have, or the wider the disparity between the levels of teams in particular, I would say, is the less impact draft has. And even then, at super low levels, if both teams suck, then draft doesn't really matter anyway. So, I mean, it does to an extent.
It matters, but not as much.
But not in the same way you'd think about it. So for you, like, why was draft so kind of impactful in the playing group stage?
We saw a lot of teams, and I don't know if it's because I think when we came into this tournament, one of the things that everyone was talking about is where teams are going to boot camp and what the reads on draft were going to be. And one thing that we typically see at Worlds is teams going into scrims and they're like, okay, everything is super, super fast. We can end the game super fast. You have to be proactive early, etc. And then we get on stage and teams are afraid to lose and they draft scaling comps and they just stick around until late game and they win. I don't think you've seen as much of that here, but I do think teams have had a uniquely difficult time trying to get a read on like one meta. And we've seen a lot of, this is probably, because I actually hate talking about draft as like a sole reason why teams win or lose. But I think that thus far, this tournament is the tournament where we've seen draft have the most impact in terms of whether a team is set up to succeed against another team or not. Like, I think the most egregious example was that Alistar pick that was by
Mammoth.
Thank you. Yeah. Or they have a really strong draft, and I believe they hovered Thresh, and then they locked in Alistar. So you have a really strong draft from Mammoth, and it also is, to Kelsey's point, a draft that doesn't require a lot of really complicated execution, right? Yep. It's a wombo combo thing. So I guess that's maybe why they locked in the Alistar, or someone can correct me. Maybe it's a pocket pick for Destiny, and he just is really comfortable with that champion. I know he's played it in the past because he's been around the scene for a while. So someone from Osh can correct me if that's like just like his strongest, like they felt like that was just his strongest champion, because that also happens a lot, very specifically in play-ins, is that when teams feel nervous or when they feel like their fate is on the line, which is what this game kind of was against Clutch. They're fighting to end up making it out of the group. You end up having drafts where teams will prioritize just like super comfort picks for themselves that might not necessarily work in the lane that they're going up against. In this case, which was Rakan, which was first picked by Clutch, so that was good, and then Kai'Sa. So we saw a lot of drafts like this where like one pick would make all the difference in terms of how that composition could have been executed, how in this example, the 2v2 lane was going to be set up, and the amount of advantages that they'd be able to accrue in the 2v2 versus having a stronger support that could do more in lane. So I think this is... I'm kind of wondering if we're going to see this continue when we are like on a slightly different level when we get to the main stage, simply because teams have been scrimming in different regions. Like the 2 Korean teams aren't even coming over until the 8th. So in 2 days, right?
Yeah.
I like lose track of time. I think the thing I'm the most curious now, after seeing how much draft affected these teams and play-ins, is seeing if that trend continues going into main stage, because there were an inordinate amount of games that were decided by really poor drafting. Like the last game that Flamingo had against Royal Youth, I think, is another one where it's just kind of like, what on earth is this draft? Where, Royal Youth is first rotationing, or like not their first rotation, which is just Lee Sin, but their first entire, like, the first 3 picks is Lee Sin, Zyricon. And then you have LeBlanc, Nocturne, which Flamingo actually said that they hadn't practiced, so I don't know what happened in that draft, and then Thresh. I think that we saw a lot of teams either having a really poor read on the meta just based on maybe how scrims were going and translating that into stage, where they might have picked something that would have worked in scrims with more proactive play style and just weren't able to execute it, or we saw teams just not knowing what to do if something was picked away, or if they felt like their entire tournament was on the line and they had to pull out something to win, and it didn't end up working.
So I think one thing that's very key here is something like Zyricon priority, which I think was a very big factor in the initial couple days. Mm-hmm. In particular, is that teams that were prioritizing Zyricon is just like always really going to work out for you on stage. It's just really simple to execute, really strong, ridiculously oppressive, very few things counter it. So that kind of, I think that ended up being a big thing that kind of shifted a lot of the tournament, was just champion priority like that. Also, a lot of teams were prioritizing champions that they realized they weren't executing properly. Mm-hmm. So stuff like the Renekton first pick, Echo first pick, like that kind of stuff that comes out of scrims that you don't really feel like quite... It gets to stage and it looks like you don't quite understand like how to execute the skirmish opportunity of Echo, like what timings and what angles he can gank from. And then also stuff like the Renekton, it's like you really have to have good jungle matchup for that pick to be a blind.
There's a reason why Elise Renekton is like insanely strong. Mm-hmm. And it's because Elise can gank early and get early pressure. So
it seemed like a lot of these picks were coming out just because they were seen to be generically strong without kind of an understanding of how they should be executed. And I think that cleaned up a little bit over the course of the tournament. The other factor, I think, was just... There is like kind of a lot of, if you will say, explosiveness coming out of certain late game picks. So the amount of burst that you can get out of something like a Ryze or a Vladimir in the mid to late game is just very unforgiving. And if you don't understand factors like tempo, which a lot of these teams don't, like even Royal Youth versus DAMWON, a lot of people are praising Closer, but I see him make a mistake that a lot of junglers make, which is that you generally have time to, if you're going to clear your side, like make one play after that before you reset. So that can either be the invades, which he attempted to do on the blue side, right, and managed to choke out Canyon, or that can be like a gank. And he ended up trying to do both. He gave up tempo on getting his second spawning camps, and he gave up Dragon for that, the Ocean Dragon in particular. So I think that these, when he should have pressure in the Zyricon lane on the bot side, So I thought that those factors were really strange. Also, the gank he went for was really questionable, because Kled versus Vladimir, you do have to have a certain amount of health whittled down for that gank to even be possible, and they weren't looking for that at all. Also, the timing on the window where that's probable is kind of limited as well. The position of the wave, a lot of things were.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember where the wave was, and I don't think it was in a good spot either.
That gank wasn't gonna work.
Yeah,
is all I'm gonna say. But it also more so that the gank wasn't gonna work is that he wasn't prioritizing getting like jungle item before his opponent. He wasn't prioritizing basically the side that was gonna earn him the more useful early game objective and allow them to snowball their advantages better. So these types of factors make me think that these teams are not really understanding, like, not just the lane swap kind of tempo that Emily was referring to, but also the fact that tempo is on jungle and actually ends up being one of the most significant parts of maintaining momentum throughout the game. So these types of factors make like drafts that are more forgiving a lot better, and you see the teams distinguish themselves more in their ability to execute drafts that are more reset reliant, are more okay, I have this advantage here, my jungler, I need to set up the wave so that the jungler can come here, and this advantage doesn't go away when Vlad gets to 20% CDR, you know, those types of factors. So I think that's, like, for example, was the last draft versus Clutch and UOL. I think a lot of people were saying that based on just pure scaling, UOL like outdrafted, but there was a really huge disconnect between having a skirmishing jungler like Vi and then scaling, like, kind of losing lanes on almost every...
Vladimir, Kaisa, and Mordekaiser, yeah.
I think Vladimir is fine after he gets enough CDR versus Syndra, but then you also have a line where it's like, Thresh, Ashe, is very position reliant. If the bot lane is better, they can win. I think their bot lane is better. No offense to Anax and Edward, but that's the situation. I think Aurelia can get a pretty significant advantage against either side lane, and if she snowballs, then she can beat them to a point. So I think that just they were able to execute that, so it's not all about scaling. It's also about, like, cohesiveness of composition and making sure you at least have one part of the map to play to. But I also do think,
just like to counter, like, if you want an example of a team that did know what side of the map they wanted to play to, the Elise Aurelia should have already told you that they were going to gank top, and if I'm remembering this game correctly, Lyra did pretty much almost go immediately top when he could for Huni to get Aurelia ahead, and that was like one of the huge differences in this game.
And they also made a pretty big advantage when UL opted into a really bad skirmish on bot side as well. So they were playing, like, both sides of the map, which it's kind of a difficult draft to execute from that perspective, because you do have to basically be playing 3 lanes. But I think in that sense, you play through mid-jungle usually and you match, which I think is what, if I recall correctly, basically what happened in that game. So yeah, I think that's kind of the counter to the point. There were also a lot of other factors, like the Heimerdinger early on from Unicorns. I think that this was just them not acknowledging in general that the champions they were picking are getting hard countered by the champions that UOL is picking. Like, they didn't have anything to deal with the amount of wave clear and the amount of siege that UOL had set up. So it was a really difficult, even though it looks like a very straightforward draft, it's just not a very fun one to have, because you're not going to get mid pressure to allow the Akali to kind of split later. So you're opting into a team fight situation, which could be favorable for you, but at the same time, you're going to lose out on side pressure a lot to things like the Tristana, especially if they end up doing a 3-1-1 instead of the 1-3-1 that they did. So I think that, yeah, there are a lot of factors going into it, but I think one of it is just, like, the unforgiving nature of the scaling burst if you don't understand the tempo of the early game is the biggest factor for me. Okay, so now let's get into what everyone actually wants to care about, which is predictions, right?
An hour into the video, we're finally going to go into matchups.
You know what? You guys know what you're
yeah, if you've ever watched a Making the Rounds, you already know.
Yeah.
We're just going to ramble.
So, yeah. I think the big thing for me is that we got a lot of interesting matchups for this. So that's really cool to see. We have, what's the order? Let me see.
It's LowKey, DAMWON first, I think.
LowKey, DAMWON first. Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
I have, I guess, kind of a hot take on this, and it's that barring a few examples, which I'll bring up, one of which is Hani. I actually think that if LowKey were a slightly better team, they would have a really strong stylistic matchup against DAMWON because they'd be able to take advantage of a lot of mistakes that DAMWON make early. DNK was one of the most active early gankers in the VCS, and I think they really rely on having him be able to gank their side lanes pretty early on to get ahead. I mean, I know a lot of people will just be like, yeah, like, Vietnamese team, they're just going to fight and they're going to be dumb. And, you know, to some extent, I think LowKey do fall into that trap where they will go for disadvantageous skirmishes when they don't have pressure, they don't have the wave in the right spot, or it's like against the tempo that they have on the map, so basically just on the wrong side. But I do think that if this were a slightly better team, if they had a stronger top laner, to be quite honest, because Hani, the Hani-Nuguri matchup is going to be the one that is probably going to be the most one-sided, I would say. I'm pretty sure Hani had trouble against Rocky in a few of their games.
That was the most exciting group in terms of top lane talent, I just want to say.
So I think, like, in games that LowKey have won, right, a lot of it is them picking drafts that they know they can execute early skirmishes. They can free up DNK to gank their lanes. They can leave mid to just hold mid, basically. And they can get Hani in a matchup where he's not going to end up getting super far behind. So either getting a counter pick or getting him something that he's comfortable enough in lane with that he's not going to be a liability. I don't think they'll be able to do that against DAMWON. I think it's going to be really difficult, actually, to overcome that pain point. But I do want to point out that a team like LowKey, drafting well for their strengths and being able to execute those early skirmishes with a really strong early ganking jungler like Elise, for example. I'm pretty sure he's played in Italy in VCS. I wouldn't recommend that champion at all, but if you want to know like what his style is like, I think you might want to look at some of his Italy games. Even though I'm hoping he doesn't pick it because I don't think she's particularly good. I think that DAMWON have a lot of holes early that they haven't addressed yet, and that were actually pointed out by, for example, Flamengo's really strong early game with Shrimp on Rek'Sai. So, although I do think this is going to be a fairly one-sided DAMWON victory, I wouldn't be surprised. I know a ton of people are just being like, 3-0, it's going to be the fastest 3-0 we've ever seen, it's going to be insane, and like already looking at when people said DAMWON were coming into the play-ins and they're going to be like, DAMWON, they're going to win their games in under 45 minutes, like entirely, that's probably not going to happen just because of the way that LowKey plays and the way that DAMWON plays. So I think it's going to be a DAMWON victory. I don't think it's going to be particularly close because of the topside mismatch that I pointed out. Mm-hmm. But I do think that LowKey is the type of team stylistically that can do really well against DAMWON.
I am really concerned about DAMWON's bot lane. I just want to say. Like, I've been concerned about their bot lane the entire tournament because it's like, you know, the worrying trend meme? It's like, okay, these guys can actually get Flame Horizon by BRTT. Like, that's very upsetting for anyone. I mean, not that I'm saying that's an insult.
Are you insulting BRTT? We don't stand for that in this house. No.
Cannot Flame Horizon UCI as well, okay? Obviously he can. That's not what I'm saying.
No, I think I mean, that was the one game that he didn't get Kai'Sa to, right? They picked it away. Yeah.
I think this is, that's the biggest concern for me, is just their bottom lane. I think this is going to be an arms race through top and bot, which is really interesting to me because I would say that Nuguri doesn't play arms race champions, right?
No, he plays Kleptomancy on scaling
super hyper acceleration champions. So just looking at these teams, there's definitely a window for LowKey to even can almost take a game, maybe.
Yeah.
I actually could see. I actually am gonna go with 3-1. Like, fuck you. I'm gonna.
Wow.
It's gonna be the 3-1.
Even I'm the one that's like, this is actually a really good stylistic matchup for LowKey. Outside of, I mean, I do think the reason why I'm not saying 3-1 is that just Hani Nuguri, honestly, just based on.
I think they're gonna take a game because
of the nuclear barrel
LowKey is
bot
like
lane.
willing to play like the Syndra bot lane.
Yeah.
They're willing to pull out a lot of stuff that's gonna have a lot of pressure. That I think that honestly, within the context of LCK, there isn't a lot of teams that play for pressure bots. So that's unsettling, right, for them in particular. So that would be my biggest concern, and I don't even think. Like, even Flamengo didn't play that optimally, right? They didn't play for a pressure bot, and I think LowKey can play it better. So that's why I think that they had the option of taking a game. There were situations where it seemed like DAMWON could foreseeably lose. Like, I never really felt like watching their games that they were going to lose them because they always had, like, the Vlad kind of win condition in the background, but I think that there's very, like, you deny the Vladimir in particular. I'm not that concerned with. This is going to be blasphemy, but I'm not that concerned with Showmaker's LeBlanc. So if you have to kind of prioritize one or the other, I would say deny the Vlad. Particularly considering the conditions in which LowKey have to win on, I'm not as concerned with the LeBlanc. So I think that's... I would take I'll give them a game.
Yeah. I think, I mean, it's frustrating because I also think that LowKey... stylistically are a good matchup. I think the reason why I'm still calling it 3-0 is because their objective setup is really, really suspect, especially around Baron. So I just can't get over that. I'm sorry. But hey, if they take a game now, like, you're the prediction queen. So.
Let's talk about
Royal Youth versus Clutch
Gaming. A lot of people are going to look at this and be like, Clutch can lose this. We could see Clutch not make it to the group stage.
One thing that's going to be really interesting about drafting in this matchup, actually, is how both teams are treating their top laners, because you notice that the first day, Royal Youth didn't prioritize getting a lot of counter picks for Armit in the top lane, but that was a lot of their games in TCL was a little bit more how they would win through him splitting. And you saw once they did focus on that and just like, okay, hard counter pick, Fiora, we're going with it. Let's go. And I think that was their most successful game in terms of execution, mainly because I think the last game they had against Flamengo was just kind of an in draft completely. The other matchup I'm looking out for is Lyra versus Closer. Kelsey already talked about Closer. I think, and I'm saying this as like a pretty staunch Lyra defender over the years, I actually don't, I know he was getting blamed a ton on day one and like flamed a lot. I think he was playing below what we saw him in NA, but I don't think he was playing so far below that it was like an incredible shock, right? Like obviously the Echo pick he was incredibly uncomfortable on. I did not like the way they executed that. I don't know if they'd executed it well in scrims and then just came to stage. And again, like when you're on stage, it's a different amount of pressure. So what happens to most teams is that they end up not going for the same fights where they, like, say there's like a 60-40 fight, right? You might see a team go for that in scrims, especially if they have like a really strong skirmishing combination, like with an Echo and a Renekton. However, on stage, when there's a lot more on the line, you're not going to go for that. You're going to wait for something that's like a 60-40 in your advantage or a 70-30 or whatever. So I think that in addition to Lyra just not being comfortable on that pick, that's a lot of what happened with the things that Clutch were drafting versus how they were playing them out. And the Lyra versus Closer matchup is going to be interesting because I think both junglers make a few similar mistakes in terms of back timing or failing to recognize where they should be applying pressure on the map through like which lane. But the big thing for me is going to be, and again, Huni is another player that people talk about and they're like, are we getting what is it, like Fnatic Huni or NA Huni, and it's like honestly the same Huni. Versus Armut, which we've seen Royal Youth, if they can set him up in a really strong counter pick and put him in a side lane, he can become incredibly difficult to deal with, and Royal Youth know how to play around that really well. So those are the two matchups that I'm looking at in this game. I think it's going to be a close game only because I haven't really seen any clean series from Clutch. I'm still giving it to Clutch, but I do think that Clutch, I have to commend them for having like a fairly strong mental, I will say, in best of fives. Because I think even in the best of fives that they've lost and had like reverse swept, we saw them recover in this play-in stage and also in the NA qualifier. So I think they will be able to adjust over a best of five in order to win. And I also think their players have, again, like when we're talking about major region third seeds versus minor region top seeds, I think another thing that comes into play with these two teams is even though Clutch are known for some wacky picks, I think they have slightly more flexibility in terms of what their players can play and their players' overall talent level. So I think that will come into play as well. But I think it's going to be close. I think we're going to see some messy games out of this one.
I think I feel pretty confidently that Clutch will win. This is, like everyone's saying, Royals, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Closer is bad. Like, I'm sorry that I'm saying this, but Closer is not like, he's mechanically good on Lee Sin, yeah, but he is not making the correct jungle decisions. He's just not. So this idea that Closer is significantly better than Lyra is really weird. I also think that, like, the advantage that Clutch ended up having over the play-in teams in his group, like the UL and Mammoth, is that they identified, we can just play like we do in NA and we can still accelerate, right? Which is like play through mid-jungle, match sides, whatever, get the Monte on a champion that he's somewhat comfortable in. Don't put him on fucking TF again. Like, just do that kind of thing, and then you'll be able to like control the game a lot better than I think Royal will. Because Royal are going to be late on certain timings that they want to do. They're going to miss objectives because of that. And I think that's just, it's going to be, if you ever want to play an acceleration game, I think you can play it against Royal fairly easily. If you have somewhat competent, like, I don't think Damonte and Lyra are good individually, but their understanding of how to play mid-jungle is above average, like, compared to lower tier teams. And by lower tier teams, I mean most of NA, so I'm
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure it's better than most of NA.
But that's why I think that they're here, and that's why I think that they can advance over teams that don't quite understand, like, the jungle influence in lane, which I think Royal don't really. So that's my big takeaway there. That's my short and sweet statement. I don't think that the series is as close as people are saying it is. I think that, yeah, of course, it's planned. They can still troll, lose the first 2 games, come back, reverse sweep. It might still be 5 games, whatever, but I think that if you like get at the core of what these teams are, then Clutch should be able to win.
I think the big thing that I'm curious about actually is how much of a because we saw Clutch adapt and adjust their draft really well, in my opinion, in terms of what they wanted to do and what they first tried out, which is kind of like, just going back and looking at that first draft on here, actually, it's just funny because it's like all of the like scrim meta picks basically with like they picked Zyrakan, which is fine, but then they have the Renekton Echo, which Renekton first pick weird. Was very quickly abandoned, as was Jungle Echo. So I think they adapted from that kind of discrepancy between scrims to stage. So what I'm curious about is, even though I do think it's going to be a messy series, if it isn't, it's because Clutch will just maintain that level of understanding going into the best of 5.
Hey, pay no attention to the fact that the camera moves. Whatever. Continuing on to the next matchup.
This is the, I guess, like outside of UOL Splyce, which we'll talk about last, I feel like this is the matchup that a lot of people are looking at because of perceptions of the LMS.
This is going to be the greatest best of 5 ever played.
Because on the one hand, you have HK, which is LMS 3rd seed in a region that's not going to exist next year. And so that's kind of like, even though talking to the players are just like, we're just focused on this, it's fine. I think that's something that's kind of looming over the perception of all of the LMS teams this year, especially with a lot of their talent getting siphoned off to the LPL, or a lot of their top talent that we're used to seeing, like, for example, the same Flash Wolves team. And then on the other hand, we have Isurus, who is kind of this all-star Latin American team where you're taking a lot of players who've been to the international wildcard.
The year of wildcard super teams.
Yeah.
Yay.
Woo! A lot of players have been to wildcard tournaments before, like back when they were called like international wildcard tournaments. Most specifically, Audi was on Lion, and then Rainbow 7, and now Isurus, who played kind of a very similar style of pick winning lanes and have him invade, and everything will be okay. And obviously, I mean, he even told me this up front, like, you can't get away with that in even in play-in stage, never mind going to a best of 5. So, but yeah, this is going to be interesting. I think HKA, you've seen them go to more of a, like we talked about teams defaulting to more of a kind of scaling team fight style, and that's the way that they've played out some of their drafts, even against teams that could take advantage of it. Like, for example, we saw both Mega and LowKey take advantage of their early game, and I think banning away Kai Wings or Khan is also going to be a good idea, since he looks a lot stronger on that champion than anything else. And then, yeah, Isurus, for me, it's really going to depend on that Audi Seiya combo. I know a lot of people will bring up Bugax and the like kind of insane split pushing that they had him do. The big thing for me is that HKA have weaknesses in the early game, and they end up winning late through a stronger understanding of how to get some of the mid-game objectives and late-game objectives, where Isurus can get out ahead really early and then have no idea how to transition anything in the mid-game, as we saw from the hour-long slugfest that was Isurus Gaming versus Detonation Focus Me. So it's an interesting matchup. Like, honestly, like, I'm not even being BM. It's an interesting matchup because both of these teams play very differently. And I do think HKA is going to win out, only because I don't have a lot of faith in Isurus Gaming's objective control mid and late. And that's where HKA have been able to win some of these sloppier games, even when they have made a ton of early game mistakes in terms of pressure, in terms of, you know, wave management, especially in bot lane. Yeah, it's a stylistic mismatch that I think HK are going to win just based on a slightly stronger understanding of the game. But this will be I won't be super shocked if Isurus win. I will actually be I'll be a little surprised, to be honest. Like, I don't know if it's because I typically go with teams that have a slightly stronger understanding of mid to late in some of these matchups, because I don't trust teams to not throw away their early advantages, but that's why I'm going with HK. I know a lot of people who follow LMS are just like, HK are donezo. This is the year that they die. The LMS is dying. But I do think they understand that better than Isurus, from what I've seen.
I think that Isurus are not going to prioritize Zyricon nearly as highly as HKA are. I think that will be a factor. I think that they will pick the Xayah, for example, but they seem more like they would prefer to ban it than play it. Like, I wasn't so impressed. And then when the Rakan was picked away, it looked much weaker for them. So I think they're just going to go with, like, a really straightforward wombo combo comp as much as possible. And if they're able to get that, because they'll have side selection in whatever side that is most comfortable for them to draft like that on, they'll probably pick that side in through the 5 games if it goes to that, and they'll win like that. So I think it's just going to be a really simple, straightforward kind of back and forth slugfest. Really, really funny to watch. I'll be excited to see it, but that's about it.
We watched Dead FM Isurus together in the press room. It was fun.
That was still not as much of a highlight as Rocky versus 3Z for me, but we're good. Let's see. And then the final one.
The premier matchup.
Europe versus Europe.
For all of the narratives.
All of the narratives. We thought that we would get away without seeing Splyce and Yule. We did not.
No. And, so I think the narratives everyone's bringing out are what we talked about at the very beginning, where UOL is basically being seen as a European team and not CIS team. And then, Inox previously playing for Splyce, Xerxes, and Chachi both having gotten their start on UOL in Europe. I think Splyce are going to win. The issue is, so if Splyce don't win, it's pretty much all in their execution, I think. Because I think they have significantly more options than Unicorns, to be honest, in terms of what they can draft and what their players can play. And then additionally, they have a much stronger understanding of how to execute it. But then you have their day 2 where it's just, I don't know. I don't understand how a team can go from having what appeared to be a really strong understanding of how they wanted to play on one day, and then the next day. I
think it wasn't that they didn't have a strong understanding. It's just that they will always play the same way every fucking time, so it doesn't really matter.
That mid game's never going away.
It's not even a mid game. It's just guys, you don't have to group as 5 and force a fight to get vision control. You just don't have to. It's not necessary. Push the fucking wave, roam into the jungle, go separately.
We all have to go together, Kelsey. It's like going to the bathroom.
We have to hold hands. We can never have side lane control. You know what? Splyce will win against Team Liquid because they're better at playing ARAM. Now I hope Splyce get out and they get into that group, because that'd be super interesting. It'd be very spicy. Yeah, it would be very funny. But I think that, it should be, based on what I've seen UOL's bot pool, I think the biggest problem is that there was limitations to Splyce's bot pool, but they banned 580 carries in that draft or whatever before you had to go to the drain. I think there's a bigger problem with UOL's bot pool, for sure. In terms of, it's okay, if we play this and we're afraid they'll play this, if we're denied Kai'Sa, then there's this problem. It's they can play Heimer, Kai'Sa, and Xayah, and he's not that good at Syndra. All of these factors, and it's pretty easy to just deny all of those champions. And then I think that their bot lane is really questionable. So, since Splyce like to play around bot lane, even when it doesn't make the most sense. I think that they should be playing to free up Northscarin and then play really hard through mid, because Humanoid
is great.
Humanoid is too good for this stage.
He's really good.
He is the best player in this stage. Fuck no grade. Humanoid is the best player in play. No. But I think that this is the... But I think that that's their best option is just play kind of Fnatic style, where support runs mid, you dive. I've seen Splyce execute that kind of thing before in LAC, so I think they can, especially if the bot lane doesn't offer that much resistance and loses Heimerdinger Fiddlesticks matchups to Xayah Rakan, or loses Heimerdinger Fiddlesticks matchups in general by 30 CS. Then I think that we're in a pretty good spot to just kind of take over that part. And then if Northscarin is free to lead plays, I think that helps a lot of their problems, which is that Xerxes doesn't really lead plays. He kind of needs Northscarin to do that. So I think that that's going to be a really nice thing. Obviously, Splyce are a team that's more likely to play for the 2v2 bottom, but I think that that's going to be their biggest advantage pretty much in the entire tournament, is just making sure that Northscarin can lead plays so that they aren't forced into this, everyone group is 5, so you can get vision. Which I'll probably do anyway. But, yeah, that's what I'm looking for, and I think that it should be. I don't think we'll see any more upsets right? In play-in?
No, I don't.
So
I think, like, even with the HK Isurus matchup, I'm picking all of the major region teams.
I guess the biggest upset I predicted was that LowKey takes a game off of DAMWON, but
we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll find out tomorrow.
It'll be a fun one. All right, thank you guys for putting up with this. We'll have a better plan going in for the next episode, but thank you for watching Making the Rounds.